Hi folks, if you're a returning subscriber, welcome back, and if you're new to the channel, my name's Lindsay and I make fly fishing and fly tying videos. What I want to do today is go through my top 10 Stillwater patterns of all time. I have to be honest, it was a tough choice. I have used many patterns over the years, but I really wanted to show you the ones that have survived the test of time. I will link the patterns in the top right hand corner of the screen, just in case you fancy tying a few of them up. I will be showing you close-up images of the flies, as well as explaining how I like to fish them. So, without further ado, let's get into it. When making this list, I've left out a couple of patterns that would definitely have made the list, but unfortunately they don't fit the competition gauge, and I wanted to keep this strictly legal. Hooks must not measure more than 5/8 of an inch overall, including the eye. The overall length of the fly may not exceed 15/16 of an inch. So these absolute fish slayers are not going to be on the list. That said, let's make a start. Coming in at number 10 is Peter Harrop's Red Devil. Peter Harrop was a chap that used to fish with Soldier Palmers a few years back, and I had the pleasure of sharing a boat with him on one occasion, and as I recall, it was a fantastic day on the dreaded bung. We both bagged up and we had a great time. Now, the Red Devil. We were sitting in the boat and I was fishing a match. Peter was out pleasure fishing and he said, "Oh Lindsay, I've been using this fly for a number of weeks now. It's really working well." He didn't manage to pass me one, but he did describe it, and later on I turned up and I got chatting to Peter and I said, "Oh Peter, I tied up some of them flies. What do you think?" And he went, "Well, there's a lot of things wrong with it, Lindsay." He says, "The wing's too long, it's too big, and the head's too small." And I said, "Well," and I thought they were like cormorant patterns, sparsely tied, but he emphasised that the wing is like just hair and the head is huge. By proportion standards, I would look at it and go, that head's too big on that fly. But he showed me his version, which was much different for what I'd tied. So I went back to the vise and I used small fibres from a cock hackle to create the wing, and I made the head even bigger than I already had it. And to my surprise, the fly was an absolute revelation on the water. It worked well while you were nymphing. It was great to have in the middle of your cast, so fish would come and have a look at your blob or whatever attractor fly you're in your top dropper, and very often they would turn in and they would take Peter's Red Devil. And it's a fly that I've had in my box now for maybe 10 years that I always reach for. It works better, to be fair, in the warmer months, but even early season it does a job for me. So there we go, that was number 10, Peter Harrop's Red Devil. Coming in at number 9 then is the Pink Death Fab. Now Fab stands for foam arsed blob, or fat arsed blob as I sometimes call it, but Fabs have really taken the competition scene over the last decade by storm. They're an absolute must-have in your box if you intend to compete in loch style, and they're good for a few things. They can be fished as a lure, an out-and-out lure, or as a supporting act to a washing line setup. Very often when I'm fishing the washing line, I'll have a Fab on my top dropper and a Fab on my point, and have little small flies in between, and they'll do a job for me. Now, this particular Fab was a Soldier Palmer pattern once again, and it was given to me by Jamie Thomas. What I've done is I've added a little hot pink marabou tail, and what I find with this is that when I'm stripping the fly and I pause, the marabou tail puffs out and it makes it really irresistible to trout, and it's caught me an awful lot of fish over the years. I'll confidently fish this fly on any line from floater down to a DI7 and it will take me fish. So there we go. At number 9 is the Pink Death Fab. Number 8 then is the Cruncher. Now I say Cruncher, it's probably not the traditional Cruncher that you may all be used to seeing, but it's certainly a fly that has performed for me over the years, and it came about by accident, and on the channel I call it the Accidental Killer. So I was unable to practice for a match, and I phoned up Paul Calvert. He said, "UV Crunchers, get some tied." So I tied up these versions that you see in the photograph, and when I arrived at the lake the next day, Paul said, no, that's not it. That the UV crunchers the lads were all using had black UV in the thorax. I'd simply got UV ribbing and created a thorax with that. Anyway, as the match went on, I was fishing with Peter Hartley that day, and he said one of his teammates had bagged up. I said, well, what would he have been fishing? And he said, well, he'd have been on his midge tip with crunchers and dial backs. And I said, okay. And I was only waiting on 3 fish, I think, for my limit. And I quickly stripped off what I was doing, put on these crunchers that I'd tied, and I was finished in about 15 minutes. It was just so quick and effective. And when you get that, when you've changed and you immediately get a result, it does give you confidence in the pattern. So the pattern has really stuck with me, and it's one I'll always reach for if the fish are on that sort of pattern, and they're best fished higher up in the water, I find, on midge tips and floaters. That's the fly I would be reaching for. So number 8, the accidental killer. Okay, let's move on to number 7. And again, it's a fly that I would fish in the upper layers of water. It's Andy Everett's dial back. Now, does it vary too much from the original dial back? I'm not so sure, you be the judge. But Andy Everett showed me this fly many years ago. He had a habit of calling them his wee buzzers, which can be quite confusing when you're in a match and you're shouting across, Andy, I see you're slaying fish, what are you getting them on? So I'm tying on buzzers and he's fishing dial backs. The way he ties it is quite unique in that once he's got the fly tied, he takes a pencil rubber and he just brushes it through the peacock herring, just stripping it down, slimming it down, and he ties them fairly short. I find them really effective in size 12. With the jungle cock eyes, it just gives it a little bit more of an aiming mark. Now, if you don't have jungle cock, white goose bites work just as well. When I've been a bit shy of the jungle cock, I have put white goose bites on and they work just as well. So how would I fish this? A floating line straight through, maybe with a heavy buzzer on the point to give me that angle in the water. So the buzzer's taking the team of flies down, and I would have maybe 3 of Andy's dial backs fishing up. Hence why he probably called it his wee buzzer. So there we go, that's number 7, Andy Everett's dial back. Okay, we're nearly halfway through the list. Let's move on to number 6. Ronnie Christie's Damsel. This is a fly that's polluted my fly box for the last 30 years. It's just so effective. I've got other damsel variations and the fly has evolved over the years in its tying, but even the basic pattern is still very effective to this day. I like to fish it on a floater or a midge tip line as part of a team, and I would always fish this fly on the point because that marabou tail is really generating lots of movement, and when there's damsel nymph around and damsel fly, this fly just cannot be beat. It remains a firm favourite, and I still have many variations of it in my fly boxes. So there we go, there's fly number 6, Ronnie Christie's Damsel. Guys, if you're getting some value from the video, please don't forget to click that thumbs up button and consider subscribing to the channel. A small click for you is a giant leap in growing the channel. It's absolutely free and you can unsubscribe at any time. Let's get back to the list. Now, I know a lot of you will be worried that there's been no dry flies so far, and number 5 is the black hopper. This is a fly that I would always reach for regardless of what's hatching on the water. If fish are in the surface film, they will definitely take this fly if it's presented to them. The fly was shown to me, or the attributes of the fly was shown to me by Simon Newman. Now, I had black hoppers in my fly box, but I had not tied them the way Simon had tied his. And what he did that made a difference was when the hackle is tied on, he trims away the bottom section, so below the shank the hackle's trimmed, which makes the fly sit right in the surface film, and it just works a treat. I fish a team of 3 of them now, not too far apart, maybe 3 foot apart, and I'll not fish them very far away from me. Because they're sitting right in the film, you've really got to be able to see where they are in the water, because fish will come up and sit these flies down, and if you're not paying attention, you won't even notice. They'll be up, they'll have sipped, they'll have spat, and your chance will be gone. So you really have to have them in sight and be very close to the boat. They've caught me an awful lot of fish, and it would always be my starting point if I was going to fish dries. So there we go. Number 5, the black hopper. Number 4 then, the vicar. This is a fly that's only, well, I say recently, the last sort of 6 or 7 seasons I've started to fish the vicar more, whereas before I used to fish the fly that's coming up next all the time. It would be the only buzzer I would fish, but the vicar's kind of sneaked in there now as a sort of change pattern, if you like, for my usual buzzer, and it's so effective. I've fished teams of 4 of these. I'll maybe have a 10 on the point, a couple of 12s, and maybe a 14 on the top dropper, just to give me that good turnover with my cast. I find that they work particularly well on floating lines and midge tips. You can vary the sizes. You can even fish these flies in between a couple of fabs or a couple of boobies, a la washing line style, and they'll take you fish all day. Very popular in Scotland. I think that popularity spilled over into England, and the flies are now widely used across all the Midlands reservoirs. So there we go, number 4, the vicar. Into the top 3 then, and number 3 for me is the Barker buzzer. Now, it might look an innocuous fly, but this has caught an awful lot of fish over the years. And how did we come into possession of this? The fly was originally given to one of my friends, Ronnie Christie, by Dave Barker. We were at an AMFC spring meeting where all the leagues come together, and it's a great affair. And this was, well, yeah, getting on 30 years ago now. And Ronnie was lucky enough to share a boat with Dave Barker, who absolutely turned him inside out with this little buzzer. But Ronnie, being the angler he is, he came in, he says, listen, we've got to get these flies tied. They're absolutely amazing. And we never looked back, really. So we tied them up on both straight shanked hooks and curved hooks, and they work just as well. And I'm not proud. If the fish want them presented statically, I'll fish them on the bung with no problem. They can also be fished as part of a washing line setup with a buoyant fly on the point and 3 of the Barker buzzers up, and I've had great success with that over many, many years. So there we go, number 3, the Barker's buzzer. We're getting near the end of the list. Number 2, love it or hate it, the orange blob is one of the most effective flies for Stillwater trout in England. There is no doubt about it. It catches an awful lot of fish. Now guys, we'll get into the weeds of it with different shades, different lengths of frits. I find that any kind of shade of orange works particularly well. Does it have to be GM12 to work? Not really. I think the presentation of the fly is much more important than whether it's a shade off GM12 or whatever colour you happen to prefer for your blobs. Now this is a fly that can be fished on any line from floater down to DI7, and I suppose the guy that made the fly really popular was Peter Appleby. So he had a method of fishing a blob. It was on a DI5 line. He would fish a very long thin leader, so the tippet material would be around £5, but because he's only fishing one fly, it's super strong, and he had a technique of fishing it which has to be seen to be believed. It brought fish to the boat from absolutely nowhere, and he would always hang at length, and he would hang right near the boat. And when I fished with him, he would have the actual tippet in his hand at the end of the retrieve, so there was still 10 foot of tippet material outside the top eye, and very often that's when he would get a take. Phenomenal to watch, a great fly to have, and I'd be very surprised if you're a Stillwater angler and you don't have some kind of orange blob in your fly. So there we go, number 2, the orange blob. Honourable mentions, the cormorant. If the list was 11, the cormorant would definitely be a fly that was on it, but unfortunately I had to keep it down to a reasonable level, so the cormorant gets an honourable mention. Before I reveal my top choice, this is my list for what it's worth. You might agree with some of my choices, but you may well have some of your own that have not been mentioned in this video. Why not let me know in the comments section below what flies would be on your top 10 list? Well, there can be only one choice really for the number 1 slot, the candy floss booby. This is a fly I developed well over 30 years ago now, and when it was first tied, I suppose by accident again, it was a fly of necessity. I tied the fly up and it just worked amazingly well, and it was a close hold pattern for the soldier palmers for a number of years, and we did extremely well with this fly many decades ago now. The fly is obviously very popular across the country and everyone's got their own variations of it. I've certainly tried different variations of the fly myself, but I still find myself turning back to the original with the hot orange thread and the pearl over the top. I believe Jock Kettles now has a white bodied version with pearl, which makes it a slightly different fly. I still like to blend the marabou, so I've got pinks and whites and I blend them together to get that two-tone effect. Now, a lot of manufacturers are now creating a sort of baby pink marabou where the white's probably not required, but back when I was tying the fly originally, the pink I had was a wee bit too shocking, and I wanted to tone that down by adding the white marabou, and it's a habit I've just never got out of. It still catches an awful lot of fish, and I still use it quite a lot. The standing joke within the team was Lindsay's gone to his default setting, which was a DI7, 10 foot of tippet and a candy floss booby. But my goodness, that fly got me out of jail more than once in matches, and it's still my firm favourite. So there we go, that's my top choice, the candy floss booby. The choice of flies is endless, and if you tie your own flies it becomes infinite, but what it boils down to, and I firmly believe this, is confidence. If you have confidence in the flies you're fishing, they will work, as long as you fish them with intensity, clarity and focus. Next week I will be hitting the river and will be showing you in some detail how to target grayling. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.